We are going to be starting in chapter 7 this evening. We're going to be in chapter 7 of the 18th book of Yisrayl, which is on page 61. And this is a sermon that Pastor gave on Donkeys 15, 2018, which was Romans 3, 2018. And the title of the sermon Pastor gave here was "The God Worship is Widespread. The Whole World is Deceived." Revelations 12:9. The last days House of Yahweh is established. And just quickly here, before we get into the sermon here, when I was looking over this title here, it brought back to mind what Pastor was speaking of during the feast and the extra days that we had to rejoice here last week on this word established. And for your notes, if you write down Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 9, in Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 9, of course, Deuteronomy 28 verses 1 through 14 tells us the blessings that come from keeping Yahweh's laws. And in Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 9, it says, "Yahweh will establish you as his holy people unto himself, as he promised you on oath, if you will keep the laws of Yahweh your Father and walk in all his ways." And it was very intriguing and enlightening what Pastor was bringing about the establishment of Yahweh's house, and down to the micro level of the control over the organisms that control the things with which the earth creeps, the things that control life and the makeup of what we see all around us, and how Yahweh is going to establish his sons, us who qualify, who humble ourselves and overcome sin and qualify to be a part of this family, this priestly family. We will be established as these leaders, and Genesis 1:26 says we're given rulership, but we know we'll be given the service to guide and direct these things. And just to bring back to your memory, in the House of Yahweh Established booklet on page 24, Pastor gave the definition of the word established from the Thorndike-Barnhart Dictionary. This is on page 24 of the House of Yahweh Established booklet. And it says to establish, to set up permanently. To set up permanently. Remember, when the authority is given to the saints of Yahweh, when the scepter, when it departs from Yahweh and it's given to Yeshua, and Yeshua recognizes those who have humbled themselves and come into unity with the one that he has sent to teach them in these last days, Yisrayl Abel Hawkins. He recognizes Yisrael's servants and sons and us who bring ourselves into unity with the chosen branch. We will be set up permanently. The house of Yahweh will be established. Will be set up permanently to guide and direct the microbes of the universe, to guide and direct life, to help Yahweh in doing so, as Genesis 1:26 says, that Yahweh made us in his image and his likeness to give us this authority. The second definition of the word established from Thorndike-Barnhart Dictionary says, settle in a position, set up in business. And I don't know if you ever remember in the, I think it's in the 8th and 9th books of Yisrayl, Pastor talks about how the work of Yahweh has always been a business and always will be a business. Remember, Yeshua said, "I must be about my Father's business." The third definition of the word established is bring about permanently, cause to be accepted. And then the fourth definition, which I think about often, in the fact of, how we have to believe without seeing. Blessed are those who believe without seeing. But we know there's going to be about 2 billion people who are going to be coming to Yahweh's house. And they're going to be left alive from the destructions, and they'll be brought to Yahweh's house to be taught how to live. And these people are going to be recognizing this part of the establishment of Yahweh's house here. The fourth definition of the word established on page 24 of the House of Yahweh Established booklet from the Thorndike-Barnhart Dictionary. The fourth definition is to show beyond dispute, to prove. All creation will see the establishment of this great house and the establishment of this priestly family when the scepter departs from Yahweh and is given to Yeshua, and he goes forth with the brides, those who have come into unity, those who have the white garments, have this humility. It's going to be shown beyond dispute and proved, for all the universe to see and all mankind. And then the fifth definition, which is the one we commonly remember from the House of Yahweh Established booklet, to make a church a national institution recognized and supported by the government. So just be mindful of that as we go through this lesson here about, in chapter 7 here where Pastor says, the God worship is widespread. The whole world is deceived. Revelations 12 verse 9. The last days house of Yahweh is established. Remember, Yahweh speaks as if things are already done. Now, we know the House of Yahweh was physically established here in these last days in 1982 by the two witnesses, Yisrayl and Jacob Hawkins. It was recognized by the government of the land. But for these 40-plus years here that Pastor's been teaching and training us, and we might have not been here that many years, but for the time period that we've been here, Pastor's been teaching and training us to set us to be established as being Yahweh's sons, to be able to be used permanently forever in bringing about the control of both the earth and the universe in perfect unity, where Yahweh's laws will be kept and the blessings that Yahweh has created the earth to experience will be felt. From the microbial level all the way up until all the way up into creation, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, and the man that walks on the earth, mankind will be able to experience the blessings that comes from this great established house of Yahweh. It's such a wonderful thing to look forward to, and the fact that we have an opportunity to be a part of that work forever. Starting off in this sermon here, Pastor says, Shalom, everyone. It looks like a feast has started. Wow, what a crowd. Praise Yahweh, you may be seated. And if you go over here to verse 3 on page 61, he says, the women's clothing rack. Have you got it set up? I can't see it from here. Oh, over there, be sure to look at that. And this was a display of clothing for the feast for the women, for the sisters. And Pastor says here in line with what this clothing represents, he says in verse 4, what we would like to do is stop all illegal lust. You'll see more about this in this sermon. The apostles fought it for years. Yahweh's prophets did too. If you write down in your notes, Jacob chapter 4, because Pastor says here, Yahweh Yahweh's prophets fought this, and our goal is to stop unlawful lust. In Jacob chapter 4 and verse 1, the apostle wrote here, what causes wars and fighting among you? Is it not from your lust that battle in your members? You lust, but you do not have. You murder and covet, but you cannot obtain. And then he says here in Jacob chapter 4, verse 6, he says, so much greater is the mercy that Yahweh gives. That's why it says, Yahweh resists the proud, but gives mercy to the humble. You can see the importance of having that white wedding garment, that perfect humility, to be able to overcome and to be used by Yahweh, where Yahweh can trust us and send us anywhere throughout the universe to do a job. He can give us an assignment, and he knows that we're going to have proven ourselves in that day. We have proven that we're going to put down unlawful lust and our own desires, and that we would bring forth Yahweh's will, not our own thoughts. But our goal is to stop unlawful lust, Pastor said. What we'd like to do is stop all illegal lust. He says in verse 4 here on page 62, continuing, the clothing is a necessary item for covering to prevent illegal lust. Illegal lust is what Satan wants you to do and be evil like the gods. And you've seen this, if you've been alive for a couple decades or so you've seen how clothing has changed even in the last 20, 30 years. How clothing has changed from a necessary item to cover one's body, and drastically with what Pastor showed in the 30s and 40s when he was growing up of what clothing used to be, especially women's clothing. And clothing has changed, and Satan's inspired these designers and these clothing manufacturers, to put out things to people, and people wear these things, one, because that's all you can buy. Most people these days, they don't make their own clothes, so they go to the store and they buy what's on the shelves. And what do they put on the shelves? They put things out there to attract attention to the woman's body, which is something that fuels it fuels illegal lust within the mind. And illegal lust is what Satan wants you to do and be evil like the gods. Remember Genesis chapter 3, verse 5, where she tells you, you be like gods. You can partake of this. You're not going to die. You be like the gods. Well, the House of Yahweh's goal is to stop all unlawful lust. Let's remember this, men, in our day-to-day actions and interactions, that we should be guarding against these things within our families. We should be teaching and guiding our families to dress modestly and appropriately and not to be attracting attention. Pastor once said, he said in a sermon, that a daughter could go and get dressed and come out, and their parents or her mother or her father could say, wow, you look so attractive, where they should say, you need to get back in there and put some clothes on, because we should be teaching and guiding those under our authority in the fact of, guarding their bodies, dressing modestly to promote righteousness instead of exposing the body and trying to attract attention and distract people from focusing on practicing righteousness and keeping Yahweh's laws. And Pastor says, anyway, look at the clothes on the clothes rack. They're supposed to be lawful and suitable for women. And he says, we also need some pictures over here by next Sabbath for the men to go by. Because even us men, we have to be on guard to make sure we're covering our bodies and dressing modestly. And that's why we have the dress code posted on the bulletin boards, and it's in the feast information guides. You can get a copy from the South Office to help remind us to make sure that we are properly carrying ourselves as men of Yahweh. And men, you got to be mindful. Sometimes I've heard it said and I've seen it done where, some will say, well, I'm not on the 44. I'm at my property, or I'm over at a friend's place or whatever. I'm going into the store or something. I'm not on the 44, so that dress code doesn't apply. But that dress code, men, is for something for us to practice constantly, whether we're seen by others or not seen by others. We should be practicing these things in our own environments to make sure that we're setting an example for our children, for our sons, and we might be setting an example for those who do see us when they go by and we don't think that we're being seen. If you go over here to verse 8, and Pastor's talking here about what man has, what tools they have in their toolbox with the bombs and the guided missiles and the drones and the things that can go underwater and travel close to the bottom of the ocean and be undetected. And in verse 8 he says, I think it was in 2007 when we published the book Birth of the Nuclear Baby and told when the wars would start and how they would build. If you get the opportunity, you might look at that book again, because Yahweh gives us some great details to go by. We told them when the war would start and how it would escalate, and it didn't escalate rapidly, so people thought we were off. We weren't off at all. And that's when Pastor brought the prophecy of, the wars in and around the great river Euphrates. And Yahweh has given us great details about when the nuclear wars would start and when they would escalate. And those things started off over there, right along the river Euphrates in Syria, which was attacked by an Israeli military strike on a nuclear facility that they had there. And you can see from that time period in 2006 and 7, from that time period down to today, you can see the buildup and the escalation in and around the great river Euphrates in that fourth part of the earth where a third part of man will be killed. And even if I don't know if you read the news, I'm sure we'll see some in the morning, Yahweh willing, but even if you read the news in the past 24 hours, you can see the escalation of things taking place right in that area. And this was prophesied by Yahweh all the way back in 96 AY. If you go over to Revelations chapter 9, in Revelations chapter 9 and verse 13 through 21, and we're just going to cover here where it says in verse 13 and 14 and 15, where it says, and the last Malach sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before Yahweh, saying to the last Malach, which had the trumpet, loose the four angels who are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the great priest on Pentecost here, we just had our last service here, spoke about, he read from the sixth book of Yisrayl, and the sermon was 9/9/2006. Roman date 9/9/2006. It was 3 days before September 12th, 2006. And this is when the seventh Malach, the last Malach, raised his right hand and his left hand towards heaven, and he loosed the four angels, the four messengers, the quartet, who are bound in the great river Euphrates. And then it goes on here in verses 9, verse 15, and it says, And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a moon and a year in order to slay the third part of the men. And then in verse 18 it says, By these 3 were the third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. And if you don't remember what the fire, the smoke, and the brimstone represents, you can go back and read the free booklet the House of Yahweh has, Nuclear Wars Really Coming. And it speaks about how these wars are not just your typical wars with guns and bombs. These things are the nuclear weapons that have been prophesied to be used in these last days to bring about this great killing, that mankind has brought upon themselves by going their own way. So remember these great details Yahweh gives us about when the nuclear wars would start and escalate. If you go over here to page 63, on page 63 of the 18th book of Yisrayl, and we're going to be here in verse 15, Pastor says, Think about that, because Yahweh prophesied that he would have a house, who would build his house, who would establish it, and then who would take this message to all the world about the 3.5 years that are to come. Okay, you can see here again this establishing, which is this setting up, this proving, this thing that will be placed, that will not be removed. It will be forever. In verse 16, he says, Think of it. You can't make these things up, and they just take place. Meaning you can't just the apostles and the prophets and those who wrote as they were moved under inspiration and direction by a Spirit which is holy and guided and directed by Yahweh's messengers. They couldn't just write these things down thousands of years ago and then it just occur. Just somehow it just occurred. No, these things were prophesied. These are prophecies that were written, and the proof that we have that these things are true is the fulfilled prophecies that have already taken place. So we know these other prophecies will take place because we know the other things that were written before have taken place. And this is the importance of studying and learning the laws and the prophets. As the great prophet Isaiah wrote, to the laws and the prophecies, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. We're the ones, Pastor says, who brought the prophecies to light before they took place in these last days. They can't say they weren't warned. The House of Yahweh brought these things to the attention of the whole world at that time. These are the things we were teaching when we went to New York. He's talking about when they went for the Millennial Summit in 2000, 8th Roman month of 2000. And they were Pastor was bringing that message that these wars were coming. And I remember some of the things Pastor brought in the third Global Conference on Peace here that was hosted by the House of Yahweh. And he talked about how he spoke with some of the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that when he talked to them about some of these prophecies, it saddened them deeply because they've seen the misery and torment that comes from these weapons. Those people experience these things, and it's kind of a shame if you ever look some of the different works that have been put forth. I know we watched one here in the House of Yahweh some years ago. It's called White Light, Black Rain, the explosion of the atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But they actually, you would think something like that would be like a piece of history that wouldn't be forgotten. But as it goes, he who wins the war writes the history. They've actually tried to hide and to get rid of the evidence that these things took place. And all the people who witnessed these things back in the 40s when they dropped these 2 bombs, the only time they've used these bombs before this last days in war. And the people who witness these things, they're getting older and they're dying off, and they're not teaching the children. They're not teaching the children what comes from these wars. No, actually, they're trying to. Japan's actually trying to change certain parts of their constitution after those bombs were dropped, and the Emperor of Japan surrendered. they wrote up a constitution that said that they would never have, weapons of force, that would be used in an offensive means. And throughout the past 60, 70 years, because the forefathers have died off and the children haven't been educated about what this war brings, now they're trying to start change laws and change the Constitution and ratify it. The Prime Minister Abe has been trying to ratify it to where they can have an offensive force, because Japan have some pretty intricate weapons in these last days. They're one of their biggest allies is the United States of America, and they sell them all these different Aegis class destroyers and such. Well, they want to be able to have greater weapons, and then they use excuses like certain things that are taking place in their regions. But they've actually totally forgotten when they wrote that Constitution after those weapons, the nuclear bombs, the atom bomb, and the hydrogen bomb were dropped. After those things took place and they saw the devastating consequence of war, they ratified their Constitution where they would never be able to come to a point where that should be able to take place again. But because it hasn't been taught in the schools, it hasn't been promoted about the real effects of war, the death and the misery that comes from these things. The effects have been forgotten, So they've actually turned back some of the protections that were placed for their people, of course for money and might and power and probably influence that have been put on them from this leader of the kings of the earth. But Pastor says here in verse 16 about we brought these prophecies, the house of Yahweh brought these to the attention of the whole world at that time. And these were the things we were teaching when we went to New York. We were even handing out booklets and books and telling them what they could get free. Then we were speaking about it in Canada at the World Meeting there. And then when we had the dignitaries come here for a meeting. Now we're getting a lot of feedback on the news we're putting out weekly. We're putting out 2 newsletters each week. So remember, men, the prophecies in the scriptures were written thousands of years before they took place. And the House of Yahweh is the only organization on the face of the earth that is showing the prophecies that are to come and the guidance of Yahweh's laws and how to be protected from this great destruction that's coming upon mankind. And this protection is only offered to Yahweh's house and those who call upon Yahweh's name. It's not being offered to anyone else, no matter their strength, might, or power. Their gods won't be able to save them. As Scripture talks about, they'll be calling on their gods to fall and save them, fall on them and save them, but they won't be able to save them. And it's a shame because of a lack of education throughout the world today, because they won't teach history as it was. They won't teach history as it took place, but they teach it as they want it to be taught. It's a shame that you see the children growing up today where they have no concept of what misery that war and violence brings upon other people. So these things are promoted and encouraged, and you can see everyone just chomping at the bit to try to kill their enemies. If you go over here to page 64 in the 8th book of Yisrayl, or 18th book of Yisrayl, page 64 and verse 25, the pastor said, if you notice when K-Texas, this is a local news agency, they took the picture of the smoke from the fire, they left out the 10 Commandment sign. Now I remember this. I remember reading the K-Texas news story. This was 3rd Roman month of 2018. We had a little fire in the 2nd Roman month of 2018. And it was on the news, and they had like all the smoke, and then they had a picture down there on 603, and they just took a picture of the old House of Yahweh sign. You have this nice big new picture with the 10 Commandments. They could have took a big picture of that, but now they just took a picture of the old House of Yahweh sign. Pastor says, you can see they left out the 10 Commandment sign. We've got the 2 signs right there together. There's the 10 Commandments billboard and the House of Yahweh billboard, but they were very careful not to get the 10 Commandments one. They hate the 10 Commandments. That's the reason they have laws passed against putting them out in public. There has been a lot of fuss about that, and people taking it to the courts and even the Supreme Court. They have laws against it. In verse 26, Pastor says, you cannot teach Yahweh's way in the public. You can teach the God's way. You can teach God worship in all the schools. You can put it in all the public places you want to. They do it all the time. Christmas is one of their celebrations. This is a feast day. They advertise it through the news media, which shows the news media is filled with nothing but lying God worship. Just think about the lies that have been told about the house. Okay, so you can see here that Yahweh's ways cannot be taught in public. You can sure teach all the God worship you want, but you can't teach righteousness. And you see this consistently, where they'll say, well, there's got to be a separation of church and state in the schools. And then the schools will have all these Christmas parties, Easter parties, Halloween parties, because it's really good for the children, candies and treats and gifts and all these things. But you try to bring the scriptures in the schools, and you get expelled. Students that bring the scriptures or try to, with their own teachings and the things that they understand about holiness, they try to have prayer services and stuff. And these children get expelled from schools and kicked out of schools because there's got to be a separation of church and state. So you can see subtly, how Satan's way, has totally filled. This was supposed to be a land that had a total separation between church and state. But Satan's way has creeped back into the news and the schools, and the main thing that really you see affecting the children is the textbooks. And all the textbooks today and all the public schools and all the institutions of higher learning, they will teach and promote God worship, such as homosexuality and bestiality, fornication and adultery, but they won't teach and promote righteousness. They won't even teach and show the true effects of war. They'll show, the glamorous side of war, the pleasures of it, but they won't teach and show the true effects of war, but they'll teach all these abominations. But if you try to put little bits of righteousness in there, like try to teach children not to steal and show respect and be honest and practice self-control, and you must be some wacko, man. You want the children to be moral? Come on now. We want our kids to experience the boys and experience the girls and have a great time. Well, this is what we've seen come down because mankind rejected Yahweh's righteous teachings. Starting with Cain and coming down even to the elders of Israel in the book of Samuel, where they rejected Samuel from being their ruler and teacher. And Yahweh foretold these things that would take place, and we see them taking place right before our very eyes, man. This is fulfilled prophecy right before our very eyes. In closing here, Pastor says in verse 29, these forced holidays that they're having, they shut down the post offices. They shut down the banks, which pretty much shut down a lot of the business. They're bringing pressure. This is pressure that's put on the people to be like the first beast. The first beast changed the Sabbath. The seventh-day Sabbath is in Exodus chapter 20. It's the fourth commandment. Yahweh says, keep holy the seventh day. He said, I made it holy. You keep it holy. Then he tells you, be of service to one another. This is how you keep holy the Sabbath day in the house of Yahweh. Okay, and this is something that you only will find taught at the great house of Yahweh, that serving one another is how we keep the Sabbath holy in the house of Yahweh. It's not just about showing up, driving up here on Sabbath, but serving one another is how we keep the Sabbath holy. Men, Yahweh bless your understanding. I'm out of time. If you all stand, I have the privilege and honor to turn it over to the next priest, the great Kohan, David Hawkins.
Shalom, everybody. Please be seated. We're going to continue in this same sermon titled, God worship is widespread, the whole world is deceived. And that's one of the things that we understand that the world don't. We're going to continue in verse 36. And Pastor is talking about the Catholic Church here. He says, by the way, how was the feast? Man, I'm telling you, I really enjoyed this feast that was just gone, and it was just amazing. It's a historical feast for me, and maybe we'll talk about that in the future. But it was a really great feast, and I particularly like the messages that Pastor brought. But continuing here in verse 36, it says, you can't have any doubts about where this religion came from that was killing all the people. They're getting their orders from the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians, their chief priests. The army was taking those orders, going out and capturing the villages. they made them pay tribute, and the ones that didn't want to or couldn't, they'd pick the ones they wanted for slaves and take them to Rome or Babylon. There they would be trained in the trade to serve the Nimrod system. What he said here in the beginning, you can't have any doubts in your mind. I would add, like today, all the confusion and weird opinions, turning right into evil, what is right into evil, and what is evil into what's right. All this confusion here is coming from that same place. You see? The same place that was slaughtering the people there. They're doing and saying things at a level where you can't see them. Okay? But the talking heads that's out there deceiving the people, bringing all this propaganda, they're the ones who are doing the bidding of the Catholic Church. And people are being confused. We're going to get to the point where there's going to be like civil war in this country. You see? In verse 37, it says, when the United States was discovered, the Queen had sent Columbus, and Columbus brought an army with him. They got to America and went to slaughtering people. So we know, that meant the Indians that were here. And Pastor point out in verse 38 that these Indians came here and they were actually using the name Yahweh. In verse 37, it says they called them tribes. They were using the name Yahweh. We know that for a fact. The American Indians still have in caves written years and years ago. So the army started killing the tribes off again. But Yahweh had it planned at that time from the United States to bring forth His will to the world, His message. Up until this generation, there was no house of Yahweh. For 1,500 years, they didn't even have the scriptures. See, all these things was kept from the people, and things are still being kept from the people. What's going on in the news media is like an inquisition. It's like a book burning that's going on to prevent the masses from getting certain information. In verse 39, he says, the great Kohan Shaul told me when he came here, we had just gotten the book of Yahweh printed. He got one and started reading it right away. He read it twice, I think. So, I guess that's why Kohan Shaul was so smart. He started off on the right foot. Think about the blindness that covers this world and where we are today, and how long it would take an individual to learn. And that's something to think about when you think about your brothers and sisters, brethren. How much investment Yahweh has already put in each and every one of us. You see? That's each of us are very valuable to Yahweh in that regard. And of course our future potential as well. But don't take for granted the knowledge that we get here. We come to Sabbath services and we see all the things take place. And I'm telling you this. I'm telling you through the eyes of my mother who was here. Okay? It's an amazing thing to behold. You see? What she witnessed while she was here. You can get the knowledge faster now. You can learn faster now than any other time, because we've got the classes, the new people here. I'd like to encourage you, don't miss a class. That's what you're here for. Miss meals if you want to, but don't miss a class. You can fast. I've often said you can't have a full stomach and a full brain at the same time. You can do without the big meal, especially if you're going to preach. Well, people come here and after a while they say, why am I here? They forget. And we always, we need to go and revisit the joy that we had, the information that we had, the thing that stirred us to come to the house of Yahweh. You're here to learn the way of Yahweh. You're here to learn, to rejoice in righteousness, and to learn what is the work of Yahweh in these last days. You know, the people at the time of Noah wouldn't know that the work of Yahweh had to do with building an ark unless they go to the one that Yahweh had sent. You see? That's what you have done. Yahweh is well pleased with you. We're going to see some big changes this feast. Some big things take place. So he says, why are we on earth? Why has Yahweh given us such a short time to live? Mankind is only allotted a few short years to live. Why? There are answers that are found in the Holy Scriptures. The reasons you're here is found in the Holy Scriptures. The scientists should listen to that. If you take the knowledge and run with it, if you take it and you start your studies, no matter how advanced you get between now and the kingdom, you will still have a job if you're humble and true to what you have learned. And that's important. Humility. Why such a short time? Well, if Yahweh had allowed a long time, man wouldn't have survived for 6,000 years. Surely there's a reason. Surely there is. The churches can't tell you. They can't tell you much. And that's one of the things she was mentioning, how pastor was ridiculing the preachers. And I had to explain to her, that pastor speaks like a prophet. And then I asked her, do you remember when Elijah was ridiculing the prophets and say, where's your gods? They must be sleeping. So she could see it right away. It's just amazing to be able to see things through somebody else's eyes who is just beginning to learn about Yahweh. All they can tell you is, well, you've got a soul inside your body, and when you die, it's going to go to heaven. Why is it going to go to heaven? This soul, you said you can't see it. Does it enjoy life? What is it? Another gassy god? What's the soul? You've got to make up something, because the scriptures don't teach anything like this. And that's a great point. They have to make this stuff up as they go on. They say the soul leaves the body, your body turns back to dust, and your soul goes to heaven. Well, do you go to heaven as sinners and we start the same wars in heaven that we've started on earth? Oh no, it'll be much different then. How different? Will they be following Yahweh's laws? Here's this. Oh yes, we'll be following Yahweh's laws. Well, why in the hell aren't you following them now? And that's one of the things that Pastor often says, talking about the Christians who want the 10 Commandments in the courtroom, in the courthouse, but they don't have it. They don't have it at their own churches. You see, when you get right down to it, they don't keep the 10 Commandments. You see, if they kept the 10 Commandments, they would be calling on Yahweh, not God. They participate in the identity theft that took place by the Hebrew scribes. And that information is out there. They can't say they don't know, really. Okay? The information is out there. I wouldn't say it's common knowledge, but among scholars, it is common knowledge. Come on, people, wake up. The truth is not that far away. Just look in your own vocabulary and see the stupidity. Did you know the apostle called you dumb gods? He called you dumb gods because you're following dumb gods. The King James Version put it dumb idol. That kind of gives it away because an idol is just a piece of wood. It can't talk, it can't smell, can't see. It's like your eternal soul, huh? Something you can't see and something you can't enjoy, something that can't enjoy life, and you're worshiping it. You made it and then worship it. Wow. The apostle said, no, they don't amount to anything. It's the demons behind those things that you're worshiping. Even the scriptures say, "O fools, for not believing." O fools, for not believing. Can you not understand that the gods won't answer your prayers? They can't answer your prayers. They're powerless. They're nothing. The apostle said. Why won't you believe what the apostle said? I'm talking to the entire world. So in verse 46 here, he says, how do you find out who you worship? You know, we ask some very basic questions in the house of Yahweh. We deal with some very basic issues. And they're heavy duty, but they're basic. And once a person gets to understand that Yahweh is not a God, it's like somebody move a big stone behind a water source and it just starts gushing. You know, it just starts gushing. So the teaching of the name of Yahweh is so essential. And I think it's the thing that's going to open it up for a lot of people. It says, how do you find out who you worship? The apostle said, to study the scriptures, search out and read. Search out and read the book of Yahweh. In Isaiah 34 verse 16. When they translated the King James, they took out the name Yahweh and put the in the book Lord and God, and so you can't see. You know, one of the scriptures that I find is most effective in explaining this to someone is in 1 Kings 22, where Jehoshaphat went to the king of Israel, and the king of Israel was trying to have him support him in a war expedition, and he requested a prophet of Yahweh. But in the King James Version it says prophet of the Lord. And you only could see clearly when the king of Israel is talking about Adon, okay, which is the Lord, and Jehoshaphat was talking about Yahweh in the interlinear, like what Pastor did during the feast, or we showed the interlinear. And sometimes that's what people need to see, because they don't get to see stuff like that. And it will begin to click and remove a layer. It's just like how we are layered, okay? We learn through layers of teaching over the years. It's the same way that the Christians were layered with deception, you see? And these things can help. Let's move on to verse 48. There was blindness. The scriptures were hidden. So it was physically hidden from the people in Rome by the Catholics. Only educated people had access to it or could even read it. But in the last days, Yahweh said, I will establish my house. Yahweh said, so he had to bring it back, the book of Yahweh. And he did, praise Yahweh. In verse 49 it says, Baal or the Lord's, they are the 4,199 of them, about that many were available in Elisha's day too. Elisha said he was the only prophet of Yahweh. Yahweh said, well, I have thousands who have not bowed the knee to Baal or to the Lord. So we're making some headway in these last days here. Then in verse 50 he talks about the Easter goddess and all of the craziness associated with that. In verse 51, why should we celebrate Easter? It's the worship of the Easter goddess. What does the Easter goddess of illegal lust, adultery, fornication have to do with salvation? Real basic stuff, but this is something that will have people thinking, will have people open their eyes and open their minds so that they could think about it. Yeah, why are we doing all this crap? You know? In verse 53, it says, think about this now. Yochanan, who wrote the book of Revelation in 96, was killed, but somehow his writings ended up with the rest of the disciples' work, and the part of it, part one in the book of Yahweh. There are no doubts about the date it was written. I didn't know of anybody who argues about it at all. It was written in 96 AY, 36 years after the destruction of the temple. Well, they didn't destroy the temple. They moved it to Rome. It's called the Sistine Chapel. We covered that. We've Pastor have mentioned this in quite a few sermons here. Continuing, it says, the same group of people, the haters of the Sabbath keepers, moved to Rome. Yes, they hated Sabbath keepers. They hated the Ten Commandments. That's definite, brethren. We shouldn't be deceived to think that they are adoring the Ten Commandments. You see? Your Bible says that. They brought forth the King James Version, which I was brought up on, but I started seeing discrepancies at an early age in the way they translated the scriptures. In the first book, the Genesis, get this. You'll want to remember this. In Genesis 1 verse 26 says in the King James Version, let us make man. And you can see within that one verse, it's talking about us and then it's talking about he. You see? Singular and plural. Okay? Well, the very next verse says, God made man, one being. That's in the King James Version. So see, it contradicts itself. Let us, well, where were the us? It didn't make any sense, I said. That was one of my questions. And it's amazing the way how Pastor was able to see these things. You could see Yahweh actually inspired him to see this thing. The teaching of Yahweh is not a God, or that we're not to be worshiping gods, is not an easy thing for people out there to see. I want to let you know that. You know, it's not an easy thing. It's one of the ways in which the people's eyes have been darkened. Okay, they're blinded. Satan used this to blind the people. You see? So, no, it doesn't. Let me continue. Verse 55. I also asked at an early age, I think about 17 years old maybe, I asked preachers, why aren't you keeping the Ten Commandments? They would say, that was the Old Testament. Now, one of the first things we should begin to notice is who labeled the first volume old. See that? That should tell you something, right? It wasn't a secular person who named it Old Testament. It was a religious person. And what that religious person was trying to do is to let you know that it's irrelevant, right? Old stuff, it's irrelevant. You see? They even have this little green Bible, and it has the second volume and the Psalms and the Proverbs, right? So, you know, in other words, you don't even have to consider the Old Testament. Let's jump over to verse 65 here. It's a big jump. Time's running out. Okay, Yahweh preserved that remnant by the teachings. You see that? He preserved the remnants by the teachings. And those teachings that went on with pastor in his young age, that was very important. Yahweh knew that age was important. You see, for learning and for setting the programming up for later years. You see, he preserved his disciples, his prophets, and all their teachings for you. All of this was done for us, brethren. Some of the donkeys actually explain that the disciples didn't have all the writings, the complete book was held back until the last day. Remember, mankind cut themselves off from Yahweh. Read it for yourself in the first 6 chapters of Genesis. Yahweh withdrew from them. They cut themselves off from the tree of life. Salvation wasn't available again until the last days, which you've got your hands on right now. The tree of life. Right there is the house of Yahweh. Salvation stayed cut off until the last days when Yahweh said, I will establish my house. These preachers that have their million-soul crusades have nothing but a bunch of lies. There's no salvation. These people are breaking the 10 Commandments. Do you have the King James Version? Any of you out there? Look, in Revelation 22, verse 14, the last book. Even in the King James Version, it says, blessed are those who keep his commandments. There's no church out there teaching the commandments at all. That's the reason an 11-year-old who had been going to church for 5 or 6 years could ask, where are the 10 Commandments? And a 30-year-old bus driver would say, what's that? What's that? That's the ignorance that we're up against. But we're making headway. Like that great oak tree. It started out the smallest of any tree, but it's going to very soon now take over the entire universe. You see, Pastor is a true Texan, he thinks big. Entire universe. That's Yahweh's plan, and Yahweh's plan comes to pass. There's nothing that's ever altered that plan of Yahweh. It looks like it's impossible, but it's not. It's not. Trust in the prophecies, brethren. Have no doubts. It's all going to take place just as it is written. All the donkeys are going to be very soon chosen. Remember, the ox and the donkey, they know who their owner is. Yahudah is going to straighten out that scripture if he hasn't done so already. The ox knows and the donkey knows. The donkeys know. They know the scriptures goes along with the other prophecy in Genesis 49, where he ties one group of donkeys to the vine, remember? And then he ties the other group of donkeys to the branch. These donkeys, animal of burden, along with Yeshua, Yahweh, the branch, and all the righteous before us are going to take over the universe, and we're going to stop all the hell they're having right now. They're having right now with the wars and planning of wars. You see, it's like one is egging another one on with all these bombings that's going on with these oil tankers in the Middle East. That's something that we need to keep an eye on. Verse 69 says, they're planning to depopulate the earth. They hope, as Malachi Martin said, the Catholic Church hopes it will come out on top. The United States hopes it will come out on top. Russia hopes it will come out on top. They're all foolish. Malachi Martin spoke of their plans years ago. In fact, they're planning on being able to be shot up into space and hang out there while all of this stuff is going on down here. Malachi Martin spoke of their plans years ago. I brought it out in sermons on that stage over there, I believe, and maybe even before we built the sanctuary. He laid out their plans for all of this. Brethren, you can rest assured you're in the right place at the right time. Have no doubts. Have no doubts. This is the house of Yahweh, and there's no other.